Hello, I'm Jane Farnham from Great British Speakers, and I'm here today chatting to host of the Fertility podcast, Natalie Silverman. Good morning, Natalie.
Morning, Jane. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, lovely to see you. Now, I know we've worked together in the past because, with voiceover work and presenting work, but we're here to discuss something completely different today, which is really exciting. And I'm excited to learn more about it. So tell me a bit about, and a bit to our audience, how we know each other and what your background is before the podcast.
So, my background is in radio broadcasting. I spent over a decade broadcasting with Heart around the UK, and I had been on a breakfast show for 5 years at the point where I discovered I needed to have fertility treatment to have my son. I'd basically met my husband, moved in with him, got engaged, got married in the ears of my listeners, sharing it all. And then when we decided we wanted to try for a family and were given the news that it wasn't going to happen as we'd assumed, that was quite a significant blow. I was still having to be on air whilst going through the fertility treatment. And I didn't really get the support that I could have done with. I went through the treatment, had successful treatment, but then left my time working in radio. I was already doing voiceover at that point, but I just felt that the skills that I had from the radio and the passion I had for talking about things that mattered, and at that point, we're talking 8 years ago, podcasting was starting to bubble around. I combined my background from the radio and started talking about what I'd just been through with the fertility treatment, because when I was looking around, there wasn't really much being talked about. It's still a pretty taboo topic. It's very different now, 8 years on to what it was then. So I launched the Fertility podcast, and the idea was to provide information to people that were going through treatment, speaking with experts as well as sharing people's stories, in a view to helping myself kind of understand more about it, but also helping others. And never imagined 8 years on that it would take me into this world and take me on a journey of ultimately ending up carrying on working in this space within the fertility sector, and also realizing that it's a massive topic that's massively understood. There's a huge amount of misconceptions, and there's a lot of ways that it affects people. And as I touched on, my experience at work was difficult, and what I know we're going to be talking a bit more about is what I'm now trying to do in the workplace with what's become a conversation I've been having for, like I say, 8 years.
So it's ended up being quite a journey for you, obviously, but it's ended with your son. And obviously for some women that probably doesn't always happen. So it's that huge journey where you desperately, you thought something was always going to happen, and then you found out it can't. So you naturally, so then you have to do this and that and jump through hoops to try to, and then at the end there might still not be that little babe in arms that you need. That must be a huge hurdle for women.
Yeah, I think for all people needing to go down this route, because it's a route for same-sex couples and individuals that are pursuing solo parenthood, it's not a guarantee. I mean, we've got amazing science, but the reality, like you say, is that there are no guarantees, and that whole childless not by choice, and people that have been through this, the loss around it and the grief associated with it. There's the grief of not being able to have a child naturally, because we're all kind of brought up seeing like, oh, I'm pregnant, whether it's in the movies or it's on adverts or it's with people that we know, these pregnancy announcements that flow over social media. And when you're faced with that's never going to be your story. That as a starting point in this conversation is a big thing to try and overcome, and how it affects you. And if you're in a relationship, you and your partner. And in our experience, we had one child. We didn't continue to build our family because for the first lot of fertility treatment, we were lucky to be funded by the NHS due to, there's all sorts of criteria. For many people, that's not the case. You have to self-fund, and this is costly. And we actually had to make the decision that we weren't going to carry on. It was a real adult kind of conversation of the financial implications, for where we were in our lives, weren't meaning that we could afford to spend what can be like thousands of pounds. Your average cycle might be between £5,000 to £8,000. And People go into debt, they borrow from family. It's all consuming, and like you said, there isn't the guarantee, and so there's people then left with the debt and not the family. On the flip side, I mean, we are massively fortunate to have our son, and then we're kind of faced with the questions he might have about why he doesn't have a sibling. So it never kind of stops, this
Yeah.
infertility kind of conversation, and how it kind of catches you off guard and how it affects your life. And for people that might go through multiple cycles and be in treatment for years, hopefully with success, but that isn't always the case.
So tell me about some of the topics you've covered on the podcast, and what are the ones that you are the biggest eye openers for people going through this?
So personally, our experience was due to male factor, and male infertility is something not talked about. I mean, women are better at talking about difficult topics than men. So I've always been really keen to put a kind of voice and use my voice to help the male conversation. There's a real misunderstanding that this is a female issue. And the reality is that it's a kind of 50-50 issue. And things like if there's recurrent pregnancy loss, often the man isn't even looked at, and it can be due to kind of factors related to the man. So making sure men understand that this is something that they can get support with. They're often overlooked during fertility treatment. It's very much the woman goes through the procedure, her name's on all the paperwork. So if we're talking about a heterosexual couple, men can feel redundant and overlooked. So I was really keen to put a voice to that, offering support, helping men hear from experts about tests that they can do, lifestyle changes that they can make. We talk a lot about, when you're trying to get ready for pregnancy, things that you can do lifestyle wise, understanding your cycle. A lot of us didn't really listen, in the biology lessons. We didn't really understand much about our cycle. We didn't really understand that we were born with all our eggs as women. And also we talk about alternative routes to parenthood for like the LGBTQ plus community, because there's a massive kind of shift in like 18 to 35-year-olds within that community who are either parents or considering becoming parents, because now it's so much more talked about. It's like a 40% increase to like their elders of how this parenthood and how our modern families look, what's now available to people, and how that conversation in society has really changed. We talk a lot about support, how massive this is like for your own emotional well-being, and how important it is to seek support, be it like coaching or peer support or counselling, which if you're going through fertility treatment you are offered. And we talk about dealing with loss, because the numbers, the stats, 1 in 4 pregnancies end in baby loss, and that is still taboo. And helping people understand why it happens, how to work through the grief, and how to then think about carrying on trying to build your family when you've been through a loss, because it has an impact on your relationship, your friendships, your work life, all of these kind of challenges when you're struggling to ultimately, like you say, bring home your baby. It has a huge toll on people's well-being.
Yeah, I've always thought about it from a personal perspective, that it would affect you, your immediate family and friends, your partner, if you've got children, but you don't actually think about how it affects how you function in the workplace. So obviously over the last 8 years, you've generated a lot of interest with the Fertility podcast. You've obviously got a great viewers that follow you. But that's actually led on to a whole new career and business, hasn't it? So tell me about how it's all developed and what you're actually doing right now.
So the fertility community is amazing and vast, and I've been really fortunate to meet so many different people from all different backgrounds with all different stories that I've captured in the podcast, which has been a real privilege. But through that, that conversation, like you say, of how it's affected people in the workplace has inevitably come up. Lots of people leave jobs. Brilliant people leave jobs because they can't deal with the stress of this. They're not supported. And I'd spoken about my experience to Grazia magazine a couple of years back, because I just felt that I wasn't really looked after. I was kind of met with we don't know what to do. Just, say that you're doing. I didn't want to say I was having fertility treatment to my boss, but I was kind of told to say something. Otherwise, they might think I was not committed to my job or I was looking for another job. And when I spoke about it kind of publicly, I was then invited into the corporate space to talk about it a bit more, and kind of realised that this wasn't being spoken about. And through working in the fertility space, I had already met a couple of people that were also talking about it. And in 2020, literally just before lockdown, I met up with my two co-founders. So one is a lady called Becky, who has a whole platform called Defining Mum, and she has her children through donor conception. She has three children through donor conception, having gone through early menopause. My other co-founder, Claire, she is an HR professional. Both Becky and Claire have backgrounds in HR. The three of us have all had fertility treatment for our families. And we all had realised that this conversation wasn't being talked about enough at work. So we put our heads together, we sat in a pub, put loads of post-it notes down and said, look, what needs to happen? And we all agreed that managers needed to be trained in how to understand this issue and ultimately how to support people, because we'd all said that we didn't really feel we had the person to go to ask for the support. So what we've done is we've created an organisation called Fertility Matters at Work, which is a community interest company. So we're a social enterprise, and we're working to help the workplace train managers understand the issue. We're doing kind of panel discussions, and we're bringing in all the different voices from our community, be that people in same-sex relationships that have either used a sperm donor, if it's a lesbian couple, or surrogacy, if it's men wanting to pursue parenthood. We've had voices from different ethnic minorities talking about the challenges that they're overcoming, from those pursuing solo parenthood, men and women talking about their challenges, but showing that it's a really tricky topic because people don't want to disclose this with the fear of being seen as not taking their work seriously or being overlooked for promotion. And what's happening is companies are going, okay, we want to keep good people. So if this is part of what might be making them leave, or people taking a lot of sick leave, then let's look at how best we can support people. So it's been an amazing roller coaster over the last couple of years. We've got kind of e-learning tools, and we've got training of different guises. And like I say, we do these like live discussions like we're doing now, because I'm a big believer in talking about a topic, having done it for the last 8 years, and hearing people's stories, real life experience of how this affected people is a really powerful way. So we put that into like the workplace setting, and it's being, really well received. And I think this conversation is really kind of starting to evolve, like we've seen what's happened with the menopause conversation and the mental health conversation in the workplace. And I'm really looking forward to kind of what happens next, because it's more and more kind of big name organisations that are saying, okay, yep. And smaller ones too, saying, right, we want to make sure people know where to turn and know what support we've got available, and we know how best to look after them.
And do you find when you do go to these companies and you're offering a discussion, the audience, does it tend to be, I mean, obviously it's a certain demographic to start off with, I suppose, in terms of age, but is it largely female centered at the moment, or is there a lot of men that join in just to come and try and learn about it? I'm just interested into how open people are about it in the workplace and how interested they are, because generally, you think that this is very much a female issue, but obviously it's very much not now with the world that we're living in.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting point, because yesterday we were actually doing an in-person event. We've done a lot of virtual ones, so obviously you can't see. But yesterday there were men in the room, and we were saying how good it was for there to be men in the room. And there was also men on the panel, because what we do is we ask organisations if there's people internally that are willing to share. And we've had a few where there have been men wanting to share, talking about loss, about pregnancy loss, and how that affects them, because often the focus is also very much put on the women, but also talking about the experience of fertility treatment and how they pretty much were ignored and they did feel like a spare part. So we are seeing more men get engaged. It does feel like a lot of the HR and wellbeing leads that we're talking to are predominantly female. This is my first kind of time in this wellbeing space. I don't know what the split is, but we're talking to a lot of women in that decision making kind of part. But when men come in and they're hearing it, there's a real empathy there, and there's a real want to be able to understand the issue better, because there is also concern when there's like a male dominated environment. We've heard people say, well, this isn't really relevant because it is predominantly men here. And that's where we just have to educate. And that's where also I think there's more tendency to maybe need a little bit more insight into the effects, because we know men are more reluctant to talk about it. So we're saying, look, these are the experiences men are having. Here are some men willing to talk about it. And I think more and more men are becoming more confident to talk about this and share their experiences, which is great.
Well, that's a real positive, isn't it? Finally, obviously, I mean, I can see the passion oozing from you around this subject. Obviously, it's very personal to you. But what gives you the biggest buzz about this new career of yours in terms of sort of going in and speaking to people and educating people and informing people about this area?
Well, in yesterday's example, like I said, it was one of our first in persons. There was a lot of nods whilst we were talking, and then after there were people saying how they just hadn't realised. So the realization that people have of how vast this topic is and how little changes that they can make and how they talk to people. Like we always say, please try to not always ask people. It's part of our narrative in society to say when you're having a baby, are you having a baby? Like it's none of our business. Certain questions that we're trying to educate people, or if somebody has sadly suffered a loss, not using language like, well, at least you could get pregnant, or at least it was early. These things that people say that they think are being helpful. So highlighting that to people and seeing that agreement from people that they just hadn't realized. Nobody means to say things
No.
out of malice. So having that light bulb go off is really rewarding. But also there was people in the room who were sharing that they had been through their own personal experience, and they felt very proud and safe that their organization was now taking this conversation on and moving it forward, and they felt that they were kind of validated, because often people feel angry that they can't deliver at work. We're talking about driven individuals that faced with this unfair life situation that is affecting how they show up at work, and they don't want to not do their job well, but there's such a huge amount going on with them that they can't be on their A game. And there was people just saying, I'm so proud that my organisation is now taking this forward, and knowing that they felt validated in their work was a very rewarding thing for us to experience. So I think seeing that light bulb go off with those learning about it, and seeing those people that have going through it, feeling validated, because that then makes them confident to be what we call advocates in an organisation, to say, look, if you're dealing with this, you can come and talk to me. I can take you for a coffee. I can make sure that you're not in the room when the baby shower collection goes round, or that awareness that an email with a pregnancy announcement might not be the best thing in the internal newsletter. Just making people aware of these things that affect other people's day. It makes the whole workplace, because we're at work, we might not be physically in the office, but we're in that work space a lot of the time, aren't we? And so we want to make sure that that emotional piece that goes on when you're trying to have your family is looked after better.
Well, that's lovely. It's it's really, really heartfelt, and I think if the workforce and people who are going through things like this feel appreciated, then there's a respect that then is automatically given to the people who their employers, and it's just a better environment all round to create productivity and creativity in the workplace. So, thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight talking to you, and it's been too long coming, but I wish you all the best for the future. And if you would like to speak, hear Natalie speak, and get her involved in your business, then do contact myself or Steve at Great British Speakers. You can email us bookings@greatbritishtalent.com, or you can phone 01753 439 289. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you.